Hello, I'm Jane Fordham, Independent People Consultant, Women in PR Committee Member and part-time Head of People for Hanbury Strategy. Inspired by World Mental Health Day 2020, I'm delighted to collaborate with the PRCA once again, and this year also with CIPR Health on this Leaders in Mental Health podcast series. We're also very grateful for the generous support of the team at Marketeers. I'm going to be in conversation with the great and the good from across the communications industry, approaching the omnipresent topic of mental health, firstly from a personal perspective, and then sharing insights and best practice in terms of leading teams to optimise wellbeing and support when mental health is challenged. And I'm delighted to kick off the series today talking to the wonderful James Endersby, Chief Executive of Opinium. Opinion joined forces with the PRCA for the second year running last week to publish Continuing the Conversation, Mental Wellbeing in PR. Welcome, James.
Hi, Jane. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, just a few opening thoughts from me, and then I'd love to hear you setting up your own research, evidently, and 1 year on as well. But there are a few elements that really stood out to me this year, including, I guess, being a natural born optimist, the positive, first of all, that as an industry, we have obviously made an awful lot of progress in just 12 short and incredible months. The conversation has well and truly started. Looking at the data specifically, 64% of respondents said they feel that their employer takes mental health and the well-being of employees seriously, up from 53% last year. And 59% of those in PR who had struggled with their mental health told their employer. However, 46% of those who didn't take time off because of their mental health said that they didn't feel that mental health was a valid reason to do so and to raise that with their employer. So I guess there's still yin and yang there despite the phenomenal progress. Looking at the main causes of mental health challenges, obviously against the significant backdrop of COVID-19, the stress of unmanageable workloads is still an issue and the biggest source of stress. The impact of the coronavirus on their employer, understandably, is the second biggest source of stress at 44%. And then I guess my final point, which is clearly prevalent in all leaders' minds at the moment, is kind of what happens post-COVID. And a staggering 96% of respondents told us that they want to continue working from home in some capacity post-COVID. Wow. So that's enough of my voice. James, I'd love to hear what really stood out for you in this year's research.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, and thanks for running through a few of those key stats. You're absolutely right. There is some good news, and then there's some work in progress that we still need to be made. But just quickly, before we get stuck in, a huge thanks to the PRCA for teaming up with Opinium again this year. And it's so great to be able to use our resources and our workplace wellbeing audit to continue to help accelerate change in the sector. And of course, to my Opinium employee engagement team for all their hard work. So back to sort of what stood out for me in the report, and I think I'm going back to that last stat, Jane. 96% told us they wanted to continue to work from home in some capacity post-COVID. So the big thing that I took out was really all around the future of the workplace, which really plays into that. From the research, it's very clear that business leaders really need to ensure that when they start to plan for whatever way of working works best beyond this crisis, that they have a flexible approach to their future plans around flexible working. So while 96% said they wanted to work in some capacity, from the stats, from the research in this audit, from the full-time work from home, 40% said that full-time work from home benefited them, but conversely 41% said that it had negatively impacted their mental health. So we really do have both sides of the coin here. So you can see that the office, in whatever form that looks like in the future, I think is still very much needed for many of us. And if at all possible, business leaders in PR should look to take an individualistic approach when it comes to flexible working in the future, and try and account for each employee's specific needs and circumstances. It's not easy, but that's definitely something that stood up for me in the report. It's been really important.
That's fascinating, isn't it? 40 versus 41%. That's obviously super, super close and super balanced. So I think your point about flexibility and taking an individual approach seems to make complete sense. I wonder how workable that is for employers. Whether employers and business leaders feel like they need a little more stability, or whether they feel that they have the aptitude and the appetite to accommodate individuals' wishes. I don't know if you've got any perspective on that.
I guess have my own perspective at Opinium before this most recent back into lockdown. We had opened our offices on a Thursday and a Friday only as a hub. So the office is not open, it's just a hub. And really for those people who were in crowded flats, lots of kids running around perhaps, etc., or were just being very negatively affected by the sort of isolation of working from home, perhaps by themselves, etc. And we really saw a big difference. And we saw, I think we had, again, researchers, we got all the data, 66% of Opinium, we're about 50 people, said that they would like to use the hub. I didn't have to.
Okay.
They would like to use it. And so when that started to flow, and I guess we only had about a month of that, I think, it worked really well, actually. So we had 2 days in the office, 3 days off. I guess in the future, I don't know, these are my thoughts, I'd like to flip that perhaps when we get back to somewhere. Okay. But it was nice to have, so we had those 3 days of absolute sort of uniformity amongst the team, and we've got used to that now. And then those 2 days where some people came in and saw huge benefits. I guess, perhaps the 40%, we're in a different industry, but we have similar statistics around that.
Okay. It makes me think, actually, I heard mental health campaigner Rob Stevenson a couple of months ago talking about the future of work. And I think he defines work, in inverted commas, in the office as a place where we might choose to go to work, sort of proactively opt in. And I guess that kind of talks to the individual choice, doesn't it? That there may be certain types of work that you feel better suited to doing at home, but there will be occasions where you want that interaction, you want a change of scenery. And I think, talking quite personally from my experience of full lockdown earlier on in the year, I think, what may have been a normal emotional sort of journey and ups and downs and trajectory, ordinarily you might feel really positive on a Monday and perhaps be in a bit of a rut by Thursday, Friday. Within the space of a morning, you could be, kind of going up and down. So totally. If we could find a way collectively to accommodate that humanity in these extraordinary times, I could see plenty of upside. If employers feel that they've got the ability to plan and understand where their workforce is and how they're working.
And I think just to that point, that employers, it's really difficult for them. It's not easy. We're managing different types of businesses as well that need different types of touch points, smaller businesses, larger businesses, very different and complex sort of, communities. It's good. I think that's going to be quite challenging for leadership, whether that's an in-house comms and PR team or a small or big agency. I guess just from the data, at least now we can see that, what their people, we actually have measurable data. We can see how employees in the PR and comms world are feeling and how they felt and what they need.
Yes.
And I guess some blend of where the business needs to be supported. Of course, the business needs to thrive, but of course it can't thrive without happy people.
Absolutely. So I'd love to, there's a wealth of data and insights, all 26 wonderful pages of it. I'd love if you could take a couple of minutes just to give us your sort of 3 key recommendations to distill for time poor leaders. What can we take out?
Brilliant. Well, yes, as we said, some of the data's improved and some of the points, but I'll tell you one improvement is the report's slightly shorter this year. So that's definitely an improvement. Maybe next year we can get it under 20. But it's full of great, invaluable insight, we think. So for me, and distilling it down absolutely into really 3 key recommendations. So, there is tons of research in the report and more. But these are the three big things that sort of hit it for us and for me, and we think will be of use for agency and in-house leaders. The first one is all around the importance of sharing stories to really impact and change agency culture around mental well-being. Our study shows that the culture around speaking up about mental health has started to shift, which is great news. As we see those who tell us that they did speak up have seen the benefits of that. However, there's still work to do amongst those who are struggling and just felt that they couldn't speak up about mental health issues. From the stats, 40% of PR professionals said they would still feel embarrassed if their colleagues discovered that they were struggling with their mental health. It was 41% last year, so no change there. But to be clear, we are seeing some great progress, which is fantastic news. So it's moving. Those who did take time off for mental health are being more open with employers about it. 72% actually told their employer that they were taking time off for mental health rather than saying it was for something else, sort of masking that. And that's up from 40% in 2019. So a huge jump in the numbers. Absolutely, a huge jump in the numbers of people feeling comfortable now, confiding in their employers. I mean, that's incredible. And that is culture change, people feeling comfortable. Agency leaders and in-house team leaders have obviously been, working really hard at making people feel comfortable. And you can see why as well. 64% said that they feel their employer takes mental health and well-being of their employees seriously, and that's up from 53% in 2019. So again, both of those huge improvements. We're seeing some great movements. So
that really is significant, isn't it? Wonderful. Good. And I guess the hope is that that's an established trajectory now. So when we sit here again in 12 months, James, it'll be even higher.
Absolutely, yeah.
Whatever the world looks like. Wonderful. And what about your second key takeout?
So the second recommendation really is, so a lot of agencies and in-house teams are doing things to help well-being, but really what we're seeing is that they do need to promote existing initiatives better and also introduce some new ones. We've seen an increase in the number of employees offering mental well-being initiatives to employees, which is great to see. The challenge now comes with ensuring employees understand how to access these initiatives and feel comfortable using them. There are also a number of initiatives that we spotted using our techniques that demonstrate positive impacts in mental well-being, such as remote working. Obviously, this was taken during the pandemic when we were working from home, so you did see an uptick on that remote working. So that again proves that again in the future some form of it will be beneficial. And then flexible working as well, which is different. That means that you can start late. You might still be in your kitchen, but the ability to have that flexible approach for when life gets in the way. Employees love that. And employees should prioritize the introduction of these if they're not already taking place. And then finally, on the kind of sort of things that they need to promote, they should listen to employees. Of course, I'd say this coming from a research agency, but when it comes to supporting their mental well-being, so by surveying and listening to employees and trying their best to implement the suggestions, that can have a major impact. Just the fact that they're listening. But of course, just a quick word of caution: when you are surveying your teams, sometimes you'll have some great suggestions that you can implement quickly, and sometimes you just can't do that. Your business can't sustain it. It's very important to try and communicate that back and why you can't do that, because often that can have a negative effect. So kind of huge positives, having a sort of being able to tell them what you really think, all anonymous obviously, but just make sure that the results are handled carefully, and that can have an effect.
Yes, but there's a huge difference between being listened to and being heard, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then finally, if I can, one final recommendation: learn from the lockdown. So as I mentioned earlier, and as you mentioned, a key part of the research showed that working from home, that the aspect of working from home during lockdown provided a number of benefits for employees. They were more relaxed. It came out in the research. Enjoyed avoiding the commute. I certainly do not miss the district line crush. And they had more time for other hobbies and interests. That said, the picture, as I've said, the picture was not all perfect, and not everything about lockdown has been easy. or working from home during lockdown has been easy.
Mm.
For employers, we recommend learning how to make some of these changes to working patterns permanent.
Yes.
Greater flexibility, trust your staff, and so on. As I
Yes.
said earlier, so
Trust.
full-scale lockdown,
Mm.
yeah, absolutely. Trust your employers,
Mm.
employees. But so full-scale lockdown has had an improved impact on mental well-being for some, but it's been detrimental to others. So I think that's, as I said earlier, that's something to really look at carefully.
Wonderful. Thank you, James. I'd love to talk about the research all day, but I also want to talk a little bit about your own personal experience. So I guess before we move on to opinion and your experiences in the recent months, I guess just a couple of last points that I found fascinating. So in terms of those initiatives that are really working, and listening to individual employees, I found it fascinating that one of those initiatives where there was still a bit of a gap, so staff really appreciated it, but only a few employers offered it, was duvet days or mental health days. So that's, the ability to wake up one morning and say, do you know what, it's really not a good day for me, and to have that flexibility. So it's almost like unplanned mental health holidays, I guess. So that was quite interesting. The other thing, and I find myself doing a lot of development with sort of middle managers and leaders around resilience and wellbeing, mental health. A message is, so much of the content and the guidance is about how to support your team, but you are humans too, and arguably, sponge-like, because you're living through it personally, but you are absorbing everything that's happening within your teams and your organization. So that was interesting, that actually there was a discrepancy between the number of senior people willing to take time off in the last 12 months. So I guess probably don't have a great deal of time to talk about that now, but I guess for any of the listeners, that's a watch out for leaders. Cliched saying, but you can't pour from an empty cup. Yeah. So make sure you look after yourselves, which actually I guess is a nice segue to talk about apart from being the engine behind this research, you are, of course, also a people leader yourself. And Opinion has had a very successful year in terms of being recognised. I know that you hold the Drum Wellbeing Award, and you have 3 other Best Places to Work awards. So that doesn't come without brilliant work and best practice and learning. So what have been some of the most successful strategies and approaches for Opinion in 2020, James?
Well, thanks, Jane. What we've really tried to do is to recreate all of our excellent people, well-being, social and cultural initiatives that before, but online. So some have had to be adapted, of course, and new initiatives brought on board. But we had the culture and the teams in place already, such as our well-being team or our social team. And so these teams, while they definitely had to adapt and work a lot harder, they've made a huge impact on the team during lockdown. And I think alongside that, feedback again. So not just going on with what we've always done, constantly trying to get feedback from the team. So many of the people in our agency are working in totally different circumstances, alone in their kitchen. You remember the crazy homeschooling for parents.
I remember it well.
And those are just 2 examples on a massive spectrum of different circumstances. And so it's impossible to sit down and exactly back to our theory. And we discussed this last year around how everybody has well-being, but not everybody's experience is the same. And so classic moment, almost sort of hyper concentrated, where if you take that attitude and that culture, we have 50 individuals at Opinion, and so we have to really go into each one of them and really try and understand what's going on with them, what works, and try and create avenues and channels that they can reach out to, or that will benefit them in different ways. So it's not a one size fits all, I guess.
Yeah,
it's so important. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, but it does. It's your most important asset. So
absolutely. And something I think that has really resonated with me at Hanbury and with a lot of the other organisations I come into contact with is how if you have very well established line management frameworks and very accomplished line managers who are very driven and, you know, and really care about that part of their role,
Yeah.
that has really come into its own. Because as you say, it's, I mean, if, you know, 50, 100, 150, you have to have a scalable framework, and that's where the line managers, come into their own. One thing I'd love to, before we sort of close with a very personal perspective of lockdown and your own individual strategies, again, something thinking about how we've tried to engage and be really fluid at Hanbury, and you mentioned a social committee there, is what sort of mechanics work really well remotely for you, you know, in your experience, to maintain that sort of water cooler, just popping to the pub after work, you know, fabric that is so important in a people industry.
Great question. Well, I think, I mean, you just mentioned line managers, and I'm not knocking line managers at all. They're very important, but at Opinion, our attitude is we don't do the all-powerful line manager thing at Opinion. Of course, on each project and each account, people are accountable to those teams, etc., and senior people and all that. But instead at Opinion, each person has a huge number of different teams and people focused in and looking after them, their career roadmap, their ambitions, well-being, training, and workload, importantly. Okay. So the average Opinion person has their career manager who they meet monthly to ensure they're on track, solve any issues, give feedback, etc. Then their desk team pod, which is now virtual, of course. And that always includes a range of cohorts, including a director, and they're meeting regularly, and drinks on Friday, obviously virtually again. And then there's the workload team, and you mentioned earlier about workload being the biggest driver of stress. So that's really important. And then the wellbeing team, which really their role is to look after everyone, running wellbeing initiatives, and the wellbeing team also taps into workload, because, as we said, that's the number one source of stress. So that's managed really carefully. And then I keep banging on about it, but another successful strategy is that we listen. So our pulse wellbeing surveys and our biannual wellbeing audit, it's the same methodology that we work with our clients on, and that's been used in this report. We use on our team, and it's absolutely it's extremely powerful, because you get that insight and you can act immediately. You don't have to spend months working out what to do. It's all there for you to make those instant changes, which are great. So that's kind of what we've been doing.
A great believer in listening on an organizational scale and individual, so you'll have nothing but words of support from me there. So just to close, James, can you share any particular personal challenges and or individual strategies that you have honed in these, I'm not going to use the word, these unbelievable recent months?
Well done. I think two spring to mind. So firstly, I've learned the importance of leading with purpose and empathy. Leading with purpose and empathy is vital, I think, during uncertain times like these. Taking a leaf out of Jacinda Ardern's leadership, during her premiership, she's dealt with a volcanic eruption, a major terrorist attack, and the pandemic. And she's an absolute role model in terms of her empathy and understanding. And these are not normal days. And colleagues and employees are working and living in extremely anxious times. And I think it's important to remember this when responding to any issues that may creep in on a day-to-day basis, or when you need to communicate. These times call for different decisions, and different and empathetic ways of managing people. And you said earlier about what about the leaders? So let's not forget them.
Yes.
Of course, too, in that. And then secondly, probably the importance of giving away control. Which is fun, which is early on, obviously, which is one of the biggest challenges. So I think one of the biggest challenges leading virtual or remote teams is for the leader to give away control and to delegate as much as possible, and it's so tough. I think I managed to adapt to this fairly swiftly. Hopefully, see what my team says. We'll put that as a question.
Exactly.
The next audit. But it's still a struggle. But it's important to remember that our teams, all of our teams, they instinctively know our clients. They know the local market conditions, their project responsibilities, etc. So they should be the best people to implement the strategy, provide feedback, of course, on what is working and not working. So yeah, so empathy and control, well, giving it away are my
Wonderful.
two big lessons. Still trying
Wonderful.
to work on.
I love it. Thank you, James, so much. And that makes me think, actually, from Women in PR's perspective, we had been gearing up for a very big campaign this year around flexible working. And then, the pandemic happened and kind of took it away for us. But I think, you talked implicitly just then and earlier on about trust. So I think, I guess my wish for listeners and leaders specifically, as we're planning for post normal, what happens next, is to, whatever you're designing, to think about the impact of work rather than the inputs, and to have trust in your employees. Where and when and how they work matters little, and they will reward that flexibility and that trust tenfold. They are the best ones to engineer and design their working structures within reason. As long as you're all communicating and you understand where and how people are working, I think this is whilst tremendously traumatic, there is a gift here for us to sift from the ashes. So brilliant to have this research again. Well done to you and your team and the PRCA, and as I say, I look forward to more learnings this time next year.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jane.
Thanks, James.